Good to be with you this morning. If you have a Bible or a device, I'd love for you to open up to Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. If you're visiting with us, we have been in a series since the beginning of June, so we're about halfway through it now, that we've simply entitled Spiritual Disciplines, the Habits of Our Faith. And this has been roughly our outline for this. We have looked at study, we've looked at fasting, we've looked at prayer, we've looked at worship. We did that last week, and today we're going to be taking a look at the discipline of what it means to serve, which is to say, even by Jesus' own estimation, is at the heart of what it means to be a Christian. And the challenge for these all kind of came out of an idea from 1 Timothy chapter 4, right? Train yourself for godliness, that all of these disciplines are not things that we are going to inherently fall back into, certainly not to the degree that we're called to do them, right? There may be some inherent motivation, right? Go back to this list. There may be some inherent motivation to study and to fast, to prayer, and even to worship. But I think you've seen in every one of these, and this will continue to be the theme, that to do them to the degree that we are called to do them, to be pleasing to God, requires a dedicated effort far above what we're just going to naturally fall into in the normal kind of timbre of our life. And 1 Timothy 4 points us to that idea. Rather, train yourself for godliness, for while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. Meaning that the training that we're doing now both pays dividends today and it'll pay dividends tomorrow, right? But it requires training, and that's kind of been the impetus of this whole series, is training up those spiritual disciplines. And so today we're going to look at the discipline of service. I came across three kind of studies I want to show to you, and let me give a caveat. Gold Hill Road as a congregation is exemplary in a lot of ways, but one of which, and again, I see a lot of churches throughout the year. I travel to churches, I see different preachers, and all have great qualities. But Gold Hill Road has always, from my understanding, had a heart to serve others, and we continually push and try to keep that at the forefront. But let me show you outside, kind of in the rest of the world, so to speak, the statistics on the number of Christians, you and I, that serve both in church and in everyday life are low. And that's kind of been some of the impetus of this. I've shown you studies almost every week that have kind of pointed to a lot of these spiritual disciplines. Almost every one of them, the ones that have been studied, found that people, professed Christians, you and me, engage in them in a shockingly low percentage, right? So we're going to look at Barna, we're going to look at Lifeway, and we're going to look at Pew. That represents 95% of all research that's done in Christianity. And all three of them find that people, you and I, professed Christians, don't serve that much. Look at what the Barna Group in 22, these are recent studies. Only 29% of practicing Christians, they say they serve in church once a month or more. 35% say they never volunteer. That they never volunteer. Over a quarter of Christians say, I never serve in one way or another. Right? Lifeway in 21 says, among churchgoers, again, the presumption is this is not a cross-section of everybody to factor in, well, some people aren't Christians, some people don't go to church. These are people that already say, I'm a Christian and I go to church regularly. Say 30% said that they serve in their church on a regular basis. 40%, again, pretty close to what Barna found, say they rarely or never do. 30 say occasionally or seasonally, maybe for VBS, maybe around other times of the year. Pew found something very similar. Among Christians in the United States, 1 in 5, 20%, say that they're involved in church on any given week. So you kind of collate all that together, and it tells us that around a quarter of us, 1 out of every 4 of us, serve with any given regularity. Probably another quarter never serve, and then everybody else is kind of somewhere in the middle, right? And that's just service here at church in a localized church setting. But I'm going to suggest to you, this is probably a product of a grander truth, which is if we're unwilling to serve here, the likelihood of us serving anywhere else is low. That's not a universal truth, but that is, broadly speaking, the research they were doing was what you're willing to do in the confines of these walls is to some degree a representative of what you'll do everywhere else, right? So again, statistically speaking, service is at the bottom of a lot of our priority lists. But we're going to look today and see that Jesus himself, when asked multiple times, what is the most important thing? What do I need to do to get into heaven? And we've looked at this a lot. I was looking back in my notes back. I think the last time we really focused in on this kind of on ahead was at this point 3 years ago. We did a series, if you remember, called The Art of Neighboring. We looked at a series on how do we serve the people around us. But it comes up a lot, right? And we're going to look at a story in Luke chapter 10 that exemplifies this. But I wanted to show you what the standard is. Again, I firmly believe Gold Hill Road is better than average, certainly in this capacity. But this is what we're working within, right? And I think the Bible calls us for better. We look in Matthew chapter 22. We'll look at this first, and then we'll transition over into Luke 10. Jesus gets this question a lot, right? If you read through the narrative of Jesus and his ministry, he gets this question to some degree often. Some of it, I think, is genuine curiosity. Some of it is trying to catch him somehow in a lie or in something to that degree. But many times it's genuine. They're saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Right? He's come to preach and to teach, and they're coming and they're saying, "Teacher, tell us what is the greatest?" And he said to him, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment." And 39, "And a second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Much harder to do than we sometimes present it. Another way to say that, it's easier said than done, right? Jesus is saying, love God. A lot of us agree and really try to funnel our energy into that. But when it comes to anybody else, again, that's at the heart of service, whether it be here, serving each other in any capacity, or going out into the community, into our neighborhoods, into our schools, and serving in that regard, all of it is sacrifice, saying someone else's needs are more important at this moment than mine. I'm going to sacrifice my time and money and energy and priority so that they get what they need. That is the heart of verse 39. The second is this, and Jesus is going to say, listen, all the law and the prophets, everything that you know up to this point hinges on this idea. If you just get 36 through 38 right, you're missing half of it. Right? You can love God, and I think really this is a formula. He's saying love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I think the inference here is if that's true, then verse 39 shouldn't be a problem. If 36 through 38 is acted upon out of the overflow of loving God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength, loving our neighbor should come naturally. But he's going to say this matters. Don't sleep on this. I see three things here, and I want to offer you three thoughts, and then we'll kind of jump very quickly into the practical, because I think that's where the meat and the potatoes of this is. I don't think many of us struggle with this conceptually. I think it really boils down to how do I do this better. But I want to offer you three things that I see just out of our reading out of Matthew 22. Number one, loving God and loving others is of supreme, and I debated how to phrase this, but supreme or eternal importance. They're saying, how do I get to heaven? How do I be pleasing to God? And Jesus says, you love God and you love other people. So to be a Christian, to love God and to love others is of highest importance by Jesus' own words. Loving God and loving others has eternal implications. That how we love, right, really just how we love matters. Who we love matters. When and how we engage in this matters. And number three is loving God and loving others demands, not asks, not suggests, but it demands service to other people. I'm going to suggest to you that if we come at Christianity and say, I love church and I love God and I love Christ and I love fellowship and I love all of these components of church and faith, but I'm unwilling to serve, do you really love Christ? Do you really love the church? Because at the heart of both of those is service to other people. That's not the easy part of Christianity, right? That's not, we talked about this all last week. all of these lessons are really, they build on each other. So I'd encourage you, go back, watch last week. We dealt with worship. And the challenge was, are we coming to worship just to check a box and move through the motions? Or are we coming to offer something to God, to glorify Him as the greatest part of who we are? I'll suggest to you, thinking about service, do we love God? Do we love Christ? Do we love the church because of what it offers to me? Or is it because of what it has done for me that I now have the opportunity, the privilege to offer it back to somebody else? Those are big ticket questions that I hope we'll wrestle with. What does service mean to you? Keep that in mind as we read Luke chapter 10. So this is a parable that you know well. We preach often and for good reason, right? This is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And again, I think it's always important, especially with this one, to frame it in its proper context. We sometimes jump right into the narrative of it, and I get it, it's a good one. But just a few of the front verses of this, the little preamble leading up, frames it all as to why it deserves all of our attention and then some. Because again, let's extrapolate this out to its logical conclusion. Jesus is asked multiple times, including here, "Teacher, what do I need to do to be pleasing? What do I need to do to inherit eternal life?" And he says, "Love God and love other people." And at this opportunity, he's going to take this chance to say, let me give you a little additional lesson beyond that. Not just about loving God, but you'll notice the part that the parable really infers upon and instructs on is the second half. How do you love everybody else? Because I think Jesus understood loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength is not going to be the holdup. It's going to be loving everybody else to that equal measure. So he gives us the parable of the Good Samaritan. Let's read this, 25 through verse 37. I'll read this aloud. You can follow along. I'll be reading out of the ESV. "Behold, a lawyer stood up to put him to the test." So this again, sometimes the questions were genuine. Sometimes like this one, they're trying to catch him up, but Jesus teaches all the same. Saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Phenomenal question. We all have to ask that at some point. He said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And he said to him, "You answered correctly. Do this and you will live." Now verse 29, "But he," the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "But who is my neighbor?" Right, trying to find some loophole. Right, who are you talking about? Certainly you can't be talking about everybody. Give me the subset of people that I have to, give me the lowest common denominator that I can, right, fulfill this to and still be pleasing. And then Jesus answers with this parable. Jesus replies, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers who stripped him, and he beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. And by chance, a priest was going down that road when he saw him, and he passed by on the other side. So likewise, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion." I hope you'll underline, circle that word. We'll come back to it. "He went on to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal and brought him to the inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take care of him, whatever more you spend, I'll repay when I come back.' Which of these 3 do you think proved to be the neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" He said, "To the one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." The parable of the Good Samaritan comes up often because, again, you and I often are the lawyer, right? And I don't even mean that in the negative sense. This lawyer clearly was trying to kind of trip Jesus up. But think about the questions that he asked, right? Jesus, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? That's a question hopefully every one of us asked daily. Coming back and saying, Lord, what do I need to do better today? What can I do to be pleasing to you, right? If that's an earnest question, it's a great one. Jesus gives him an answer, right? What does the law say? What does the word of God say, as we would phrase it, right? Love God and love other people. But then the lawyer asked a question that we rake him over the coals for this, but wouldn't we, at least in the back of our minds, whether we would audibly say it to Jesus or not, who knows? But wouldn't we also, if given enough time, think, well, who does that really mean? Right? Who do I really need to do that to? And that's when Jesus brings us this parable and says, it's everyone, right? And it's the people that you would least expect that deserve your service, that deserve your sacrifice. So here's how I'm gonna phrase this. I've got 5, but they're gonna move relatively quickly. And I've kind of framed it like this. I can serve better if. Because I think service for many Christians is not, it's a bit of a fluid scale, right? All of us to some degree are willing to serve in some capacity, and that's great. But the challenge here that Jesus is pointing out is loving your neighbor as yourself with no exclusions on who that neighbor could be, right? There's no asterisk, there's no list, there's no footnotes that say if the neighbor fits such and such category, they don't count. That's what the lawyer wanted. That's what we want. Well, that's what we want many times. So the question is somewhat to a degree, wherever your service is today, how can I do that better? How can I do that more like Christ? How can I really model the Good Samaritan more fully? But we're going to use the story of the Good Samaritan to guide us for it. All right, I can serve better if. I can serve better if I see opportunities. Sometimes it really comes down to as simple as this. And I'll ask you very plainly, are you looking for opportunities? If given them, are you ready to act on opportunities? Right? Or is it lip service? And I say that to myself too. This is not ugly, but I am asking the question, do we just go through the motions of, oh yeah, I want to serve. I want to go do A, B, and C, right? I want to help with, camp and VBS and disaster relief, and I want to teach and I want to do all this, but then when push really comes to shove, are we willing to step up? Are we looking for the opportunities around us? Let's go back and reread 31 through 33. Again, of this group, you had a priest, you have a Levite, and you have a Samaritan. One of those 3 don't belong, right? The priest and the Levite are men that by their definition, right, by their choice, by their occupation, right, it's especially being a Levite is more than that, it's heritage and things, but these are people, a Levite is facilitating worship for God's people. You know what a priest does? These are people that should live their lives looking for opportunities. But look at this. By a chance, a priest was going down the road, and when he saw, he went to the other side. The Levite came, again, a man that should have been looking for opportunities to glorify God. He saw this man in the ditch right across the road. But the Samaritan comes, the person who has been told that the Israelites from birth are your enemy. There's probably no greater group of people that were at odds with Israel more than the Samaritans. I mean, it's generations old, not 2 or 3 generations, but 10, 15 generations back. I mean, this is great grandparents that are passing down. You aren't supposed to intermingle. But the Samaritan saw an opportunity. In verse 33, I told you to circle a word. And a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion. He had compassion. Are we looking for opportunities to have compassion on others? Because the truth of the matter is, to do this well asks something of you and me. It asks us to set aside self for a moment, to put someone else ahead of where we may be. Right? Remember last week we talked about worship and how do we define worship? And I gave you a quote: to temporarily pause our infatuation with ourselves to prioritize God for a moment. Service and compassion is no different. Are we looking for the opportunities? Again, plainly put, are we the priest and the Levite, seeing opportunities and jutting across the side of the road? Or are we the Samaritan who sees it and has compassion? If you look in John chapter 4, starting in verse 31. Fascinating word study I'd encourage you to do. The word compassion that gets used there in Luke 10 is a word that Jesus himself uses in the original language often. You could do a tremendous study just on that word compassion because it is at the heart of the life and the ministry of Christ. It is at the very heart of it. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him saying, "Rabbi, eat." But he said to them, "I have food to eat that you do not know about." And so the disciples said to one another, "Has anyone brought him something to eat?" And Jesus said, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Do you not say, 'There are yet 4 mouths, then come the harvest'? Look, I'll tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for the harvest." I hope you'll look at that phrase, lift up your eyes and see. You know, we look around us, you out in the world. It's fascinating just walking around, even, walk to Target, and everybody, adults, kids, they're just like this walking around, in our phones. Because nobody's looking up to see what's happening in the real world. Jesus is saying, quit worrying about food, quit worrying about all this other. Do you not understand that I have opportunities? I've got things to do. I've been sent by my Father to do them. Look at your eyes, lift your eyes up, and you'll see that the fields are white. I'd say that the fields are still white if we're willing to see the opportunity. I can serve better. Number 2, I can serve better when I engage my heart. Friends, if you come at service from a purely mental, academic perspective, it's never going to make sense. It's just not. By its definition, it's asking you to set your own needs, preferences, desires, wants. You're setting them aside. You're discarding them for a moment to engage somebody else. Your heart has to step in and address that. It's what happened here in Luke chapter 10. I'll offer you 3 verses here. One in Luke 10, again, one we just read. A Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. Matthew 9, these are all Jesus, right? When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like a sheep without a shepherd. Colossians chapter 3, put on then as God's chosen one, holy, beloved, compassionate. When we are being told the descriptions of what it means to be a Christian, compassionate is one of the key words that should describe us. Think about this. If somebody were to paint a profile of you and me as a Christian, would compassionate be a word that they would use? I hope so, but I'm fearful they wouldn't. He had compassion. He had compassion. Be compassionate. I have to engage my heart. I can serve better, number 3, when I rearrange my priorities. I can serve better when my priorities are rearranged, right? Go to verse 34. So this is the Samaritan man that saw this helpless individual laying in the ditch. It says he went to him. He bound up his wounds and he poured on oil and wine. He set him up on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. I think the inference that we're supposed to make, among others here, is that was not his plan for the day. You look at that phrase, he went to him. In the original language, it literally means that he went out of his way. That's not why he was on that road. That's not what he was planning to do. But that's what the opportunity presented itself, and he said, I can't pass this up. I have to go to him. I have to do what I can. I'm going to bound his wounds up, and then I'm going to take care, and I'm going to take him to somebody who can continue that process. That's probably worth noting. I mean, service, you're not expected, none of us are expected to do it all alone. That's going to come a point here in a moment. You look even at the service opportunities that this church engages with. I mean, yeah, there's individual components to it, but by and large, they are all a group. We're going to look at enlisting the help of others here in a moment, but he took the opportunity. Again, what are my priorities? His priority that day probably was not, I'm going to go take care of this man that got beaten and left in the ditch. but it became the priority when he saw the opportunity. Philippians 2 speaks to this. Philippians 2 and verse 4. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. That is to say, where's our priorities? Is it only about us? Is it only about what I want and need? Or does it become, can I help somebody else? That was certainly what the Samaritan man did in Luke chapter 10. I can serve better if I validate my faith. Right, there comes a point where we have to recognize that service at the heart is what it means to be a Christian. Right, we see this in 1 John chapter 3. We just did a long study of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and this is one of my favorite verses, a couple of verses that come out of this, starting in verse 18. But listen to this understanding that to serve, we have to understand where that service comes from. It's not just to check a box. Again, Jesus loved God and loved other people. If we're serving purely to fulfill that, we're kind of missing the point. Listen to what he says here. Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. Now 19, I've highlighted for us. By this we shall know. By this. Right, letting us love not just in word, but in deed and in truth. By this, we shall know that we are of the truth, and notice this, reassure our heart before him. Right, that coupling together our words and our actions validate our faith and prove who we belong to. That we are serving Father God by doing the things he would ask us to do. Verse 20, for whenever our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart, and he knows everything. We validate our faith. And lastly, I can serve better if I enlist the help of others. I can enlist the help of others. Look in verses 34 and 35. He went to him and he bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he took out 2 denarii and he gave it to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I'll repay when I come back. Friends, Christianity is not meant to be a solo endeavor. No part of it. Right, we talked about worship, we've talked about there's individual components of it, but at its core, it's meant to be done in fellowship. To the degree that fellowship is one of our spiritual disciplines, we'll get to in a few weeks. But he recognized an opportunity and he said, let me enlist others' help. Let me go take him to this innkeeper. Let me do my part by bounding up the wounds. Let me offer the money to pay for it, but let me then tag somebody else in. Ministry, church, faith is this way. Right, we do it together and we help, and that's the whole reason Paul describes the church as that body that relies on each other. You may have, if you've been perceptive, may have already picked up on this, but you see our 5 points today spell out serve. S-E-R-V-E. To serve requires all 5. See opportunities, engage your heart, rearrange your priorities, validate your faith, enlist the help of others. Are we willing to serve? Here's your challenge this week. So if you're visiting with us all throughout the spiritual discipline series, we have offered a challenge every week to all members alike, right? We're doing it, the elders are doing it, the ministers are doing it. This is something we're participating in church-wide. And this is our challenge this week. Pick one new area of service. And again, the initial thought was kind of an area of service here at church, but really this is much broader than that, right? And we give you that kind of liberty and freedom to find an area that you want to serve in, whether it be at home, whether it be at church, whatever it may be. Pick one area of service that you've never been involved with, right? That I think is key, because many of us kind of fall backwards into what we've done over and over and over again. And that's not to say that that's not valuable, but these spiritual discipline lessons have been aimed at pushing you beyond your boundaries, pushing you into what makes us a little bit uncomfortable. Pick an area that you've never been involved with and serve in that area, right? And it's tough to kind of put a time frame on it because some areas of service are a day long, some of them are a quarter long, some of them are longer than that. But find one that you want to serve in and go serve in it, because that's what it means. That is, the spiritual discipline of service is a habit of the faith. It has to be, if you and I want to be pleasing to God. This morning, if you aren't a Christian, we want to give you that opportunity to put on Christ, Again, there is no greater display of service than to come and to come to Christ and recognize our need for him in our life and say, Lord, I want to be of service to you into eternity. Right? I want to go into the waters of baptism and I want to come up a new creature so that I can go out into the world, I can serve the church, I can serve your people, I can serve those that don't know you yet. If that's your need or desire this morning, we'd love to help you with it. If we can do anything for you this morning, would you come let us know about it as we stand and as we sing together?